Did you know that back in 2019, Donald Trump publicly wrote on X, "I'm not a fan of Bitcoin. It is not money. It's highly volatile and built on thin air." At that time, Bitcoin was branded as nothing more than a criminal tool, a scammer's playground, and a speculative bubble. The United States government treated it with suspicion, leaning towards strict regulation and outright rejection. But fast forward 6 years later, and the story takes a shocking turn. The very same president who once denounced cryptocurrencies now walks into the White House and personally signs an order that embraces the industry he once called a risky asset. In July 2025, Trump made history. He signed the Genius Act, America's very first federal stablecoin law. Alongside it, 2 more groundbreaking bills came into effect, prompting the media to call that week Crypto Week in the United States. At the signing ceremony, Trump stood before the nation and declared, "This is the greatest financial revolution since the birth of the internet." The reaction was instant. The markets exploded. Bitcoin surged. Coinbase stock hit a quarterly high. Investors cheered, proclaiming that America's long-awaited crypto spring had finally arrived. But was this dramatic shift really just Trump changing his mind overnight? Think about it. This was the same man who once fought tooth and nail against central bank digital currencies, who took a hard line on the crypto world. And now, he's standing at the very center of the stage, championing it. So was this an accident, or a plan carefully written long in advance? The truth is, the real signals of this policy U-turn didn't appear on the day of the signing. They were already in motion months earlier, quietly, when the balance of power began to shift. When Trump returned to the White House, the sudden change in America's crypto policy seemed abrupt, but the groundwork was already laid. The pivotal moment came when control of the SEC slipped from the hands of one man to another. At the time, the SEC was still chaired by Gary Gensler, the figure everyone in the crypto industry knew as the ultimate hardliner. Even after Trump took office, Gensler didn't step down. And since the SEC is an independent agency, the president couldn't simply fire him on a whim. That meant no matter how much Trump wanted to ease regulation, his agenda was stuck. Until April 2025, when everything began to shift. Trump's administration nominated veteran regulator Paul Atkins. After a narrow 52-44 vote in Congress, Atkins was confirmed, symbolizing Trump's reclamation of regulatory control. Atkins was no stranger to Washington. He had served as an SEC commissioner under George W. Bush and was known for consistently advocating limited regulation and the principles of a free market. And once in office, Atkins wasted no time making his stance clear. At the SEC annual meeting, he told the audience, "The SEC should not fear innovation. It should learn to embrace it." Later on CNBC, he looked into the camera and declared, "Tokenization is the kind of innovation that markets should encourage." The message was unambiguous. The United States needed to build an inclusive regulatory framework for Web3. And almost immediately, words became action. The SEC introduced a regulatory sandbox, allowing new tokens to experiment with issuance. Investigations into Coinbase, Ripple, and Circle were put on hold. The Department of Justice issued a memo, making it clear that enforcement should no longer be the priority. Even NCT, the National Crypto Enforcement Task Force, pivoted its strategy. The overall regulatory tone shifted, transforming from hostility to openness. And the market felt it instantly. Meanwhile, lobbying for new legislation intensified, and for once, Congress began to converge on a rare consensus. Republicans leaned into the argument for market freedom, while Democrats underscored investor protection. And although they clashed on taxes and fine details, there was one point they all agreed on: America needed to legislate now. By mid-July, that political energy reached a boiling point. In just a matter of days, 3 major bills cleared Congress and landed on the president's desk. That week would go down in history as Crypto Week. On July 18th, Trump signed them into law, setting the stage for a new federal era of cryptocurrency regulation. The centerpiece was the Genius Act, America's very first federal stablecoin law. It spelled out strict requirements. Only U.S. financial institutions could issue stablecoins. They had to undergo federal audits. Reserves had to be held in cash or short-term U.S. treasuries, and foreign issuers as well as decentralized projects were effectively shut out. Alongside it came the Clarity Act, which finally resolved the years-long turf war between agencies by granting oversight of stablecoins to the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. More importantly, it legally defined stablecoins as payment instruments, not securities, not speculative assets. And then there was the Anti-CBDC Act, which outright prohibited the Federal Reserve from issuing any kind of digital dollar. The reasoning was simple: to protect privacy and prevent the government from surveilling every single citizen transaction. With this move, the Trump administration aligned itself squarely with the values of decentralization. Together, these three laws created a comprehensive framework from technical standards and legal classification to policy direction. And the speed was staggering. What normally takes years in Washington had been accomplished in weeks. The markets erupted in celebration. Coinbase stock surged for 2 consecutive days, with a weekly gain of more than 18%. Bitcoin skyrocketed, blasting through $71,000 within the week. Ethereum recorded its largest rally in 3 months. Even the S&P 500 was pulled upward by the wave of crypto enthusiasm. Inside the industry, the response was jubilant. Circle CEO Jeremy Allaire called it a milestone we've been waiting for. Coinbase Brian Armstrong declared that the United States would now take the lead in Web3. Yet not everyone joined the celebration. Critics moved fast. Senator Elizabeth Warren pointed out that although the law bans members of Congress from trading stablecoins, it places no such limits on the president or his family, sparking accusations that Trump could personally profit. Others worried about the exclusion of decentralized finance. The Genius Act, while providing clarity, could effectively eliminate stablecoins that don't carry institutional backing, potentially suffocating the vision of open, borderless finance. Strategists warned that banning CBDCs might come with a cost. By taking privacy as the rallying cry, the U.S. could fall behind in the global race for sovereign digital currencies, especially as China's digital yuan is already in circulation and the EU has proposed legislation. And perhaps most critically, the legislation still leaves DeFi in a legal vacuum. The laws regulate centralized issuers, but protocols like Uniswap or MakerDAO remain in a gray zone with no clear governance or legal accountability. Developers are left without a recognized legal position, and DAOs remain outside the system entirely. For investors, these laws reduce risk and make stablecoins more trustworthy. But for developers and decentralized projects, the true test has only just begun. And yet in the White House, Trump struck a triumphant tone, repeating once again, "This is the greatest financial revolution since the birth of the internet." The crowd cheered. The markets soared. But beneath the celebration lies a far more complex story, one filled with contradictions, hidden risks, and long-term consequences that have yet to play out. When the 3 bills passed, when the president signed them, when Bitcoin and Ethereum soared, the headlines made it look like a victory. But look closer, and you'll see that this legislative pivot is more than just a political statement. It's the opening move in a much larger, high-stakes game. From this moment forward, the future of America's crypto industry will no longer be defined by the question of how to regulate. Instead, the battle shifts to who will control the resources and who will hold the power. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. This is Smart Money Basics, helping you make smarter moves and build lasting wealth. If you found today's episode useful, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who could use this insight. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Thanks for watching. Stay focused, and I'll see you next time.